My husband announced his affair with Dr. Victoria Hayes in front of 200 wedding guests at our 10th anniversary celebration, claiming she understood his needs better than I ever could. What he didn't know was that I'd already been secretly building something that would make his precious fertility specialist answer to me. When I revealed the truth 6 months later, Derek collapsed in tears, begging me to reconsider what I was about to take away from both of them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The champagne bubbles caught the crystal chandelier light as I surveyed the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, my heart swelling with pride at what Derek and I had accomplished together. 200 of our closest friends, family members, and colleagues filled the elegant space, their laughter mixing with the soft jazz quartet we'd hired for our 10th anniversary celebration. I smoothed the silk of my emerald green gown, the same color Derek had said brought out my eyes on our wedding day, and took a steadying breath. 10 years of marriage deserved this kind of celebration. 10 years of supporting Derek through medical school, his residency, and finally his successful cardiology practice. 10 years of my own career growth from junior marketing associate to senior executive at MedTech Solutions, one of Denver's premier pharmaceutical consulting firms. We'd built something beautiful together, even if children hadn't been part of that picture yet. The fertility struggles had been the only shadow over our otherwise perfect life. 3 years of treatments, procedures, and monthly disappointments had tested us both, but I'd thought we were stronger for having weathered that storm together. Victoria Hayes at Peak Reproductive Medicine had been our last hope, and when even her cutting-edge treatments failed to give us the family we'd dreamed of, we'd made peace with our life as it was. At least I thought we had. Derek stood near the bar, his tall frame commanding attention in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, gesturing animatedly as he spoke with a group of his medical colleagues. Even after a decade together, I still felt that flutter of attraction watching him in his element. His dark hair was beginning to show distinguished threads of silver at the temples, and his smile still had the power to stop conversations across a room. Margaret Thompson, my mentor from work, appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. At 62, Maggie had navigated the corporate world with the kind of grace and steel I aspired to, building MedTech from a small startup into a powerhouse that consulted for medical practices across the Rocky Mountain region. Quite a turnout, she observed, her sharp blue eyes taking in the crowd. You've outdone yourself with this party, Amanda, though I have to say you look a bit pale. Everything all right? I accepted the champagne gratefully, using the moment to gather my thoughts. Just overwhelmed by the generosity, I think. When we sent the invitations, I never expected this many people to show up on a Thursday evening. Maggie's expression softened slightly. She'd been more than a boss over the past 8 years, becoming something of a surrogate mother figure since my own parents had passed away in a car accident during my 2nd year of marriage. You deserve to be celebrated, dear, both of you. Though I notice Derek seems particularly animated tonight. Following her gaze, I watched my husband throw back his head in laughter at something Dr. Robert Chen had said. There was something different about his energy tonight, an electricity I hadn't seen in months. Since our final fertility appointment, actually, when Dr. Hayes had gently but firmly recommended we explore other options. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention please. Derek's voice suddenly boomed across the ballroom as he tapped his champagne flute with a dinner knife. The conversations gradually died down as all eyes turned to him, standing near the small stage where the jazz quartet had been playing. My stomach did a little flip of nervous excitement. We hadn't planned any formal speeches tonight, preferring to keep things casual and celebratory. But Derek was nothing if not spontaneous, and I figured he wanted to thank our guests for coming. 10 years ago I married the woman I thought was the love of my life, Derek began, his voice carrying easily across the now silent room. I felt my cheeks warm as smiles turned in my direction, champagne glasses raised in anticipation of a romantic toast, but something in Derek's tone made my smile falter. There was an edge there, a careful precision that spoke of rehearsed words rather than spontaneous emotion. Amanda has been an incredible partner in many ways, he continued, and I noticed he didn't look in my direction. She supported my career, built her own successful business, and has been everything a man could ask for in a wife. But sometimes, life shows us that we've been settling for comfort instead of reaching for true passion. The room had gone completely still now, the kind of silence that felt heavy with impending disaster. I could see Patricia Walsh, my college roommate, frowning in confusion near the back of the room. Jonathan Miller, Derek's best friend since medical school, had gone pale and was shaking his head slightly, as if trying to signal Derek to stop whatever this was. 6 months ago I met someone who opened my eyes to what real connection looks like, Derek said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. Someone who understands parts of me that Amanda never could, never tried to understand. Someone who shares my dreams of having a family, who doesn't see that desire as a burden or an inconvenience. The champagne flute slipped from my numb fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the ballroom. Every eye in the room snapped to me, faces ranging from confused to horrified as they began to understand what was happening. Victoria Hayes has shown me what it means to be truly seen, truly valued for who I am, rather than what I can provide, Derek continued, seemingly oblivious to the shocked murmurs beginning to ripple through the crowd. Victoria, would you join me up here? My legs went weak as I watched the elegant blonde woman I'd trusted with my most intimate struggles, my deepest desires, rise gracefully from a table near the front where I hadn't even noticed her sitting. Victoria Hayes moved through the frozen crowd like she was walking down a runway, her red dress a stark contrast to the black and white formal wear around her. She reached Derek's side and he immediately wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close in a gesture so intimate, so proprietary, that several women in the audience audibly gasped. I know this isn't the announcement anyone expected tonight, Derek said, his eyes finally finding mine across the room, but Amanda and I have been living as roommates for months, going through the motions of a marriage that died somewhere in those sterile fertility clinic rooms. Victoria has helped me remember what it feels like to be alive, to have hope for the future. The world seemed to tilt sideways as I stared at this man I'd shared a bed with just that morning, who'd kissed me goodbye before I left for work, who'd helped me zip up this very dress 3 hours early. The Derek standing on that stage was a stranger wearing my husband's face, speaking words that felt like physical blows. Amanda deserves someone who can love her completely, he continued, and I could hear the carefully rehearsed justification in his tone. Someone who won't resent her for the children we couldn't have together. Victoria and I are already expecting our first child, and we want to start this new chapter of our lives honestly, without deception. The last sentence hit the room like a bomb. Someone screamed, though I couldn't tell who. Jonathan Miller was pushing through the crowd toward the stage, his face twisted with fury. Maggie's arms suddenly wrapped around my shoulders as my knees buckled, her strength the only thing keeping me upright. Derek, what the hell are you doing? Jonathan's voice carried clearly as he reached the edge of the stage. This is insane, you can't just. I can. And I am. Derek cut him off, his arm tightening around Dr. Hayes. Amanda will be fine. She's always been resourceful, always landed on her feet. This is better for everyone in the long run. The room erupted into chaos as guests began talking all at once, some pushing toward the exits, others clustering together in shocked conversation. I could see my cousin Linda covering her mouth in horror, tears streaming down her face. Stephen Garcia, Derek's colleague, was staring at the stage with unconcealed disgust. Through it all, Dr. Victoria Hayes stood silent and composed beside my husband, one manicured hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. The stomach that carried the child Derek and I had tried so desperately to create together. Amanda. Maggie's voice seemed to come from very far away. Amanda, we need to get you out of here. But I couldn't move, couldn't process what had just happened. This morning I'd been a happily married woman, planning a celebration of a decade of love and partnership. Now I was a publicly humiliated divorce case, standing in front of 200 people who'd just witnessed the most devastating moment of my life. Derek finally looked at me again, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it, replaced by cold determination. "The papers are already filed," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for me to hear over the chaos. "Victoria and I are moving to her house this weekend. You can keep the Cherry Creek place until everything's settled." That's when the rage hit me, burning through the shock like acid. He'd planned this, all of it. The announcement, the timeline, the legal proceedings. While I'd been agonizing over centerpieces and menu selections for our anniversary party, he'd been plotting the public destruction of our marriage. "Get me out of here," I whispered to Maggie, my voice barely audible over the continued chaos. "Please, just get me out of here." Maggie nodded grimly and began steering me toward a side exit, her body shielding me from the worst of the stares and whispered comments. As we reached the door, I heard Derek's voice one last time, thanking people for coming, and inviting them to stay for dinner, despite the change in circumstances. The casual audacity of it, the assumption that people would simply continue celebrating after what they'd just witnessed, finally broke something loose inside me. I turned back for one last look at the stage where my husband stood with his pregnant lover, both of them smiling as if they'd just announced an engagement, instead of destroying a decade of marriage. "This isn't over," I whispered, though neither of them could hear me. It was a promise to myself more than a threat to them. "This is just the beginning." Maggie hurried me through the hotel corridors and into her car without speaking, understanding that words would be useless right now. As we pulled away from the Ritz-Carlton, I caught a glimpse of other guests streaming out of the building, some on phones, others gesturing animatedly as they processed what they'd just witnessed. By tomorrow, everyone in Denver's medical and business communities would know that Amanda Richardson's husband had left her for his fertility doctor at their own anniversary party. The humiliation would follow me everywhere, a scarlet letter of rejection and failure. But as we drove through the familiar streets of the city I'd called home for the past 15 years, something besides devastation began to take root in my chest. Derek thought he'd destroyed me tonight, thought he'd left me broken and helpless while he rode off into the sunset with his new love and their miracle baby. He had no idea what he'd actually done, no idea what I was capable of when pushed beyond my breaking point, no idea that his perfect new life was built on much shakier ground than he realized. The first phase of my transformation had begun the moment Derek opened his mouth on that stage. By the time I was finished, he'd understand exactly what it meant to underestimate Amanda Richardson. The night air felt cold against my skin as Maggie drove me home to the house I'd shared with Derek, the house that would now become my war room. I had 6 months before Dr. Victoria Hayes would have her baby, 6 months before they planned to settle into their new life together, 6 months to build something that would change everything. As we pulled into my driveway, I realized that Derek had made one crucial mistake in his calculated betrayal. He'd assumed I would crumble, that I would retreat into shame and depression while he moved forward with his shiny new family. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift possible. He'd set me free from any obligation to protect his feelings, his reputation, or his future. For the first time in our marriage, I could focus entirely on what Amanda Richardson wanted, what she was capable of, what she deserved. The war was just beginning, and Derek had no idea he'd already lost. The 3 weeks following the anniversary disaster passed in a haze of legal meetings, awkward silences, and the kind of profound loneliness that settles into your bones like winter cold. I'd taken extended leave from MedTech, unable to face the pitying looks and whispered conversations that followed me through the office corridor. Maggie had insisted, promising my job would be waiting when I was ready to return, but sitting in my empty Cherry Creek house felt like drowning in slow motion. Derek had been efficient in his cruelty. His belongings disappeared from our home while I was meeting with lawyers, leaving behind only the faintest outline of where his favorite chair had sat and the bare spaces on the bathroom counter where his toiletries once lived. He'd even taken the coffee maker, a petty theft that somehow hurt more than losing the expensive artwork we'd collected together. The divorce papers were thorough and precisely calculated. Derek kept his medical practice, his investment accounts, and his pension. I kept the house, my own retirement savings, and enough alimony to maintain my current lifestyle for exactly 2 years. After that, I'd be entirely on my own. His lawyers had clearly advised him that Colorado's no-fault divorce laws meant his adultery wouldn't significantly impact the financial settlement, and they were right. What devastated me more than the legal proceedings was the complete radio silence from the man I'd thought I knew. No apology, no explanation beyond what he'd announced at the party, no acknowledgement that perhaps destroying our marriage in front of 200 people had been unnecessarily cruel. Derek Richardson had simply erased me from his life as efficiently as he'd removed his possessions from our home. The isolation was crushing. Derek's medical colleagues, people I'd considered friends for years, had chosen sides with predictable efficiency. Dr. Robert Chen no longer returned my calls. Dr. Michelle Davis, whose children I'd bought birthday presents for, suddenly became unavailable whenever I suggested lunch. Even Jonathan Miller, who'd looked so horrified at the anniversary party, had sent only a brief text expressing his sympathy before going silent. I understood the politics of it. Derek was a respected cardiologist with a thriving practice. Dr. Victoria Hayes ran one of Denver's most successful fertility clinics. I was just a pharmaceutical marketing executive, easily expendable from their social circle. The medical community had closed ranks around the couple, leaving me on the outside looking in. My own professional network felt equally treacherous. News of Derek's public betrayal had spread through Denver's business community like wildfire, turning me into an object of fascination and pity. Former colleagues would stop mid-sentence when I entered a room, their conversations clearly having been about my situation. The monthly networking events I'd once enjoyed became minefields of concerned looks and carefully worded questions about how I was holding up. 3 weeks after the party, I found myself sitting in my empty living room at 2 in the afternoon, still in pajamas, staring at the stack of sympathy cards that had arrived from people who felt obligated to acknowledge my public humiliation. The house felt like a mausoleum, all gleaming surfaces and designer furniture that no longer held any warmth or meaning. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my stupor. Through the peephole, I saw Maggie standing on my front porch, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the October wind, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish, and wearing the kind of determined expression that had made her legendary in boardrooms across Colorado. "You look terrible," she announced when I opened the door, pushing past me into the house with characteristic directness. "When was the last time you showered, or ate something that didn't come from a delivery app?" I couldn't remember, honestly. The days had blurred together in a cycle of legal meetings, real estate consultations, and long stretches of mindless television watching. "I'm fine, Maggie, just taking some time to process everything." "Nonsense," she said briskly, heading straight for my kitchen. "You're wallowing, which is understandable given the circumstances, but it's not productive, and Amanda Richardson has never been anything if not productive." She began unpacking what turned out to be homemade lasagna, fresh bread, and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. "Sit down and tell me what you've been doing besides feeling sorry for yourself." The bluntness should have stung, but instead it felt refreshing after weeks of careful tiptoeing from everyone else in my life. "I've been meeting with lawyers, trying to figure out how to untangle 15 years of shared everything." "Did you know Derek had been moving money around for months before the party?" "He'd been planning this for a long time." Maggie's jaw tightened as she sliced the lasagna with precise movements. "That doesn't surprise me. Men like Derek don't make impulsive decisions, they make calculated ones." "What did surprise me was how thoroughly he underestimated you." "Underestimated me how?" "He got everything he wanted, the perfect new wife, a baby on the way, and he managed to make me look like a pathetic abandoned wife in front of half of Denver's professional community." "Exactly," Maggie said, turning to face me with that sharp smile I'd seen her use to devastating effect in business negotiations. "He thinks he's won because he got the immediate gratification he wanted, but Derek never was very good at long-term strategic thinking, was he?" I accepted the plate of lasagna she handed me, my stomach growling as the aroma hit me. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until real food appeared in front of me. "What do you mean?" "I mean he's handed you the greatest opportunity of your career without realizing it." Maggie said, settling across from me with her own plate. Tell me, what do you know about the fertility clinic business? The question seemed to come from nowhere. What Dr. Hayes? Not much beyond what I learned during our treatments. Why? Because it's one of the fastest growing medical specialties in the country, and one of the least regulated from a business perspective, Maggie said, her eyes taking on the gleam they got when she'd identified a new market opportunity. Do you know how much money peak reproductive medicine brings in annually? I shook my head, suddenly interested, despite myself. $12 million in revenue last year, Maggie continued. Dr. Hayes personally cleared over $800,000 after expenses. Not bad for a woman who's only been in practice for 6 years. The numbers were staggering, far more than I'd imagined. How do you know that? Because MedTech has been tracking the reproductive medicine market for 2 years now, Maggie explained. We've been looking for the right entry point, the right partnership opportunity. The demand for fertility services is exploding, but most clinics are small, independent operations run by doctors who are brilliant at medicine but terrible at business. She leaned forward, her expression intensifying. Amanda, you have 15 years of experience in pharmaceutical marketing, 8 years of building client relationships with medical practices, and an MBA from Denver University. You understand both the medical and business sides of healthcare better than 90% of the people in this industry. Okay, but what does that have to do with anything? I'm hardly in a position to start competing with Dr. Hayes, even if I wanted to, aren't you? Maggie asked quietly. You know the fertility industry from a patient perspective. You know exactly what women like you are looking for, what they're not getting from current providers. You understand the emotional journey, the financial pressures, the medical complexities. That's insight money can't buy. She pulled out her phone and showed me a document she'd apparently prepared in advance. MedTech has been approached by 3 different fertility specialists in the past 6 months, all looking for business consulting services. Dr. Benjamin Clark in Austin wants to expand his practice, but doesn't know how to scale operations. Dr. Angela Brooks in Phoenix is drowning in administrative work and losing patients because of poor customer service. Dr. Thomas Wright in Portland has the medical expertise but no idea how to market his services effectively. I stared at the information, my mind beginning to work for the first time in weeks. You're talking about fertility clinic consulting. I'm talking about fertility clinic transformation, Maggie corrected, taking successful medical practices and turning them into exceptional patient experiences, creating a network of affiliated clinics that share best practices, marketing resources, and operational efficiency, building something that puts patient care and emotional support at the center of the business model. The idea was intriguing, but it felt impossibly ambitious. Maggie, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't just jump into a completely new industry because my marriage fell apart. I don't have the capital, the connections, or frankly the emotional energy to start something like that. You have all 3, you just don't realize it yet, Maggie said firmly. The divorce settlement gives you enough capital to get started. Your MedTech network includes relationships with half the medical practices in the Rocky Mountain region. And as for emotional energy, nothing fuels success like the desire to prove wrong everyone who counted you out. She reached across the table and covered my hand with her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Amanda, I've watched you turn struggling pharmaceutical accounts into success stories for 8 years. I've seen you take complex medical concepts and translate them into marketing campaigns that actually help people. You have a gift for seeing what medical practices need before they even know they need it. I thought about the fertility journey Derek and I had been on. The endless appointments and procedures and hopes raised and dashed. The one thing that had been consistently missing was a sense that anyone truly understood what we were going through emotionally. Dr. Hayes had been technically competent, but the experience had felt clinical and impersonal. What would this look like practically? I asked, surprised to hear myself engaging with the idea. Maggie's smile was triumphant. It starts with Dr. Clark in Austin. He's been trying to reach us for 3 months about consulting services, but frankly we've been too busy with pharmaceutical clients to take on medical practices. You could go down there for an initial assessment, see what he needs, develop a proposal for comprehensive practice transformation. Just me? I've never done solo consulting work. You'd be operating under the medtech umbrella initially, Maggie explained. Full company support, access to our research and development resources, administrative backup. Think of it as a trial run for what could eventually become your own division within the company. The possibility hung in the air between us, tantalizing and terrifying in equal measure. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a happily married pharmaceutical executive with a comfortable, predictable life. Now I was being offered the chance to build something entirely new, to channel my pain into purpose. What does MedTech get out of this arrangement? I asked, my business instincts finally kicking in. A new revenue stream and a growing market, Maggie said immediately. Plus the satisfaction of watching one of our best people turn a personal catastrophe into professional triumph. And honestly, Amanda, the company could use some good publicity right now. Our association with your success story would be valuable marketing. She wasn't wrong about that. MedTech's reputation had taken some hits recently after a consulting contract with a pain management clinic had gone south, resulting in regulatory scrutiny and negative press coverage. Being part of a positive transformation story in reproductive medicine would help rebuild their brand. I'd want to visit Dr. Clark's practice before making any commitments, I said slowly. See what he's working with. Understand his patient population. Assess whether there's really an opportunity there. Of course, Maggie agreed. I can have flights arranged for next week if you're interested. Austin's fertility market is particularly underserved for a city of that size. Dr. Clark has been operating solo for 4 years, building a solid reputation but struggling to grow beyond his current capacity. The conversation continued through the afternoon as Maggie shared market research, financial projections, and case studies from similar consulting arrangements MedTech had done with other medical specialties. By the time she left, I had a folder full of information about the fertility industry, and Dr. Clark's practice specifically. More importantly, I had something I hadn't felt since Derek's announcement. I had hope. That evening, I found myself actually cooking dinner for the first time in weeks, making a simple pasta dish while thinking through the possibilities Maggie had presented. The work would be challenging, requiring me to learn an entirely new industry while navigating the emotional minefield of helping other couples pursue the family Derek and I had failed to create together. But there was something appealing about the idea of taking my personal experience with fertility treatments and turning it into professional expertise. I knew firsthand what patients needed that they weren't getting. I understood the financial pressures, the emotional roller coaster, the way hope and despair could cycle through your life on a monthly basis. I also knew that Dr. Victoria Hayes, despite her medical expertise, had zero business training. She was brilliant at reproductive endocrinology but had no idea how to scale operations, improve patient satisfaction, or build the kind of comprehensive support systems that could transform fertility treatment from a medical procedure into a healing journey. As I cleaned up the kitchen, I realized that Maggie was right about one thing. Derek had underestimated me catastrophically. He'd assumed that destroying our marriage would destroy me, that I'd retreat into victimhood and depression while he built his new life with Dr. Hay. Instead, he'd freed me from the constraints of being a supportive wife, from the careful balancing act of managing someone else's ego while pursuing my own ambition. For the first time in 15 years, I could focus entirely on what Amanda Richardson wanted to build, without worrying about how it might affect Derek's career or social standing. The irony was delicious. Derek's betrayal with a fertility specialist was about to launch me into the fertility business. His assumption that I'd fade quietly into the background was about to be proven spectacularly wrong. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could find about reproductive medicine business practices, patient satisfaction surveys, and industry growth projections. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Maggie was right about the opportunity. The fertility industry was dominated by small, independent practices run by doctors who excelled at medicine but struggled with business operation. Patient satisfaction scores were consistently lower than in other medical specialties, primarily due to poor communication, long wait times, and lack of emotional support resources. Insurance coverage was spotty and confusing, leaving many patients paying thousands of dollars out of pocket for treatments they didn't fully understand. There was enormous potential to improve both patient outcomes and practice profitability by implementing better business processes, customer service training, and comprehensive support system. The challenge would be convincing doctors to trust a business consultant with their medical practices, especially one whose primary qualification was having been a fertility patient herself. By Friday, I'd made my decision. I called Maggie and told her to book the flight to Austin. Benjamin Clark's practice was located in a converted house in Austin's Westlake neighborhood, a far cry from the sleek medical building that housed peak reproductive medicine in Denver. The waiting room was cramped and outdated, with furniture that looked like it had been purchased from a hotel liquidation sale and magazines that were at least 6 months old, but the staff was warm and attentive, and Dr. Clark himself was exactly what Maggie had promised. A soft-spoken man in his early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of gentle bedside manner that immediately put patients at ease. He'd completed his fellowship at Johns Hopkins and could have had his pick of positions at prestigious fertility centers, but had chosen to start his own practice because he wanted to provide more personalized care. The problem is that personalized care doesn't scale efficiently, he explained as he walked me through his facility. I can handle about 15 new patients per month with my current setup, but the demand is there for twice that number. I'm turning people away every week. His office was a study in organized chaos, patient files stacked on every available surface, appointment schedules written on whiteboards because his computer system couldn't handle the complexity of fertility treatment protocol, and a phone that rang constantly with calls from patients needing test results, appointment changes, or simply reassurance about their treatment plans. "What's your biggest operational challenge?" I asked, though the answer was obvious from looking around. "Time management," Clark said immediately. "I spend 3 hours every evening returning patient calls, updating files, and preparing for the next day's procedures. My nurse Catherine does her best, but she's overwhelmed too. We need better systems, but I don't know where to start." I spent the rest of the day observing patient interactions, reviewing financial records, and talking with Catherine Wilson, Dr. Clark's nurse and office manager. Catherine was a treasure, a woman in her 50s, who'd worked in reproductive medicine for over 20 years, and knew the industry inside and out. She was also frustrated by the practice's limitations. "Dr. Clark is the best fertility specialist I've ever worked with," she told me during a brief break between patients. "His success rates are excellent, his patients adore him, and he truly cares about helping people build family. But he's burning himself out trying to do everything personally, and we're not serving patients as well as we could because our systems are a mess." That evening, Dr. Clark took me to dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking Lake Travis, where we could talk without interruption. Away from the chaos of his office, he opened up about his vision for reproductive medicine and his frustrations with the current state of the industry. "I went into this specialty because I wanted to help people create families," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "But somewhere along the way, it became about maximizing cycle volumes and minimizing time per patient. Most of my colleagues see 12 to 15 patients per day. I see 8, maximum, because I believe each person deserves time to have their questions answered, their concerns addressed." "That's admirable, but it's also limiting your impact," I pointed out. "If you could serve twice as many patients without compromising care quality, wouldn't that be better for everyone?" Dr. Clark nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I want to achieve. I just don't know how to get there." Over the next 2 hours we talked through possibilities for practice expansion, operational improvements, and patient experience enhancements. Dr. Clark was brilliant at medicine, but had never considered how business principles could improve patient outcome. The conversation was energizing in a way I hadn't experienced since before Derek's betrayal. "I have a proposition for you," I said as we finished dinner. "Give me 6 months to transform your practice. I'll develop comprehensive business systems, train your staff on customer service excellence, implement technology solutions that actually work, and create patient support programs that set you apart from every other fertility clinic in Texas." Doc Clark leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "What would that cost?" Nothing up front, I said, the plan crystallizing as I spoke. I want a partnership. Help me prove that my approach to fertility practice management works, and we'll discuss profit-sharing arrangements based on improved outcomes. If I can't deliver measurable improvements in both patient satisfaction and practice revenue within 6 months, you owe me nothing. The offer was risky for me, but it was also exactly the kind of bold move that would either launch my new career or confirm that I'd lost my mind along with my marriage. Dr. Clark extended his hand across the table. Amanda Richardson, he said with a smile, I think you just offered me exactly what I've been praying for. Flying back to Denver the next morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, excitement about the future, purpose beyond my own pain. The sense that maybe, just maybe, Derek's betrayal had pushed me towards something better than the life I'd been living. I had 6 months to prove that Amanda Richardson could build something extraordinary from the ashes of her marriage. 6 months to show Derek and Hayes and everyone else who'd written me off that they'd seriously underestimated what I was capable of achieving. The real work was about to begin. Moving to Austin felt like stepping into a completely different world. The city's energy was infectious, a blend of tech innovation and Southern hospitality that stood in stark contrast to Denver's more reserved corporate culture. I'd rented a furnished apartment in the Zilker neighborhood, close enough to Doc Clark's practice to walk to work but far enough from my old life to feel like a genuine fresh start. The apartment was nothing like the carefully curated Cherry Creek house I'd shared with Derek. Instead of designer furniture and coordinated color schemes, I had functional pieces and walls decorated with local artwork I'd picked up at weekend markets. For the first time in years, my living space reflected my own taste rather than what looked impressive for Derek's colleagues. My first official day at Austin Reproductive Associates dawned bright and unseasonably warm for November. I arrived at 7 in the morning to find Dr. Clark already in his office, reviewing patient charts and preparing for the day's procedure. Catherine had beaten us both there, her desk already organized with the day's schedule and patient files arranged in precise order. Ready to see how the sausage gets made? Dr. Clark asked with a wry smile as he handed me a cup of coffee that was stronger than anything I'd ever tasted. The next 8 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Patients arrived for everything from initial consultations to egg retrievals, to pregnancy monitoring, each requiring different amounts of time, different emotional support and different follow-up care. Dr. Clark moved between exam rooms with practiced efficiency, but I could see the stress building in his shoulders as the day progressed. Catherine managed the front desk, answered phones, coordinated with the lab, scheduled procedures, handled insurance authorizations and provided emotional support to anxious patients. By noon she looked ready to collapse, and we still had 6 more hours of appointments ahead of us. This is insane, I told Dr. Clark during a brief break between patients. Catherine is doing the work of 3 people, and you're trying to be doctor, counselor, and business manager all at once. Welcome to private practice fertility medicine, he said with exhausted resignation. Most days are like this. The successful days are worse. I spent the afternoon shadowing different aspects of the operation, taking detailed notes about workflow bottlenecks, communication gaps, and missed opportunities for efficiency improvement. The problems were numerous but solvable with the right systems and additional staff. The biggest issue was information flow. Patient calls weren't being tracked systematically, leading to duplicated efforts and missed follow-up. Lab results were being communicated via phone calls that interrupted appointments, rather than through secure messaging systems that could be handled asynchronously. Insurance authorizations were being processed manually, creating delays that frustrated both patients and staff. But there were also tremendous strengths to build upon. Dr. Clark's medical expertise was exceptional, with success rates that exceeded national averages across all age groups and diagnostic categories. His bedside manner created fierce patient loyalty, with women driving from hundreds of miles away to be treated by him specifically. Catherine's institutional knowledge was encyclopedic, and her genuine care for patients created an atmosphere of warmth and support that larger clinics couldn't match. That evening I stayed late to analyze the day's data and begin developing solutions. Dr. Clark found me in his office at 9 o'clock, surrounded by patient flowcharts and process diagrams I'd drawn on his whiteboard. You know you don't have to solve everything in your first week, he said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Actually, I think I do, I replied, turning to face him. You're burning through goodwill with patients because of systemic problems that are completely fixable. Every day we don't implement better processes, you're losing potential patients and exhausting your existing staff. I walked him through my preliminary analysis, showing how simple workflow changes could reduce patient wait times by an average of 20 minutes per appointment, how automated systems could eliminate most of the phone tag that consumed Catherine's day, and how better scheduling protocols could increase patient volume without compromising care quality. This all sounds wonderful in theory, Dr. Clark said carefully, but implementing new systems while maintaining current operations feels impossible. We can barely keep up with what we're doing now. That's why we're going to do it in phases, I explained, moving to the whiteboard where I'd outlined a 6-month implementation timeline. We start with the highest impact, lowest disruption changes first: new phone system that routes calls, appropriate electronic medical records, integration that eliminates duplicate data entry, automated appointment reminders that reduce no-shows. Dr. Clark studied the timeline with growing interest. How much is this going to cost? Less than you're losing in inefficiencies every month, I said confidently. The phone system upgrade will pay for itself within 6 weeks, just through reduced staff overtime. The EMR integration will eliminate at least 10 hours per week of administrative work that Catherine is currently doing manually. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the transformation project with an intensity that surprised everyone, including myself. I researched fertility-specific software solutions, interviewed patient communications specialists, and developed training protocols for customer service excellence in medical settings. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. Every small improvement felt like a victory. Every positive patient comment felt like validation that my approach was working. More importantly, I was discovering capabilities I didn't know I possessed, skills that had been dormant during my years of supporting Derek's career rather than building my own. Catherine became my closest ally and most valuable resource. During lunch breaks, she would share stories about patient interactions that revealed gaps in our service delivery, insights about what women really needed during fertility treatment that no medical textbook could teach. Most of these women feel completely out of control, she explained one afternoon, as we reviewed patient satisfaction surveys. They're spending thousands of dollars on treatments they don't fully understand, dealing with procedures that are physically and emotionally draining, and hoping for outcomes that are never guaranteed. What they need most is information, support, and the feeling that someone truly cares about their journey. Her words resonated deeply with my own fertility experience. Derek and I had felt like passive recipients of medical care rather than active participants in our treatment planning. Dr. Hayes had been competent but clinical, providing medical facts without emotional context or comprehensive support. What if we created a patient advocacy program? I suggest. Someone whose only job is to help patients navigate their treatment, understand their options, and connect with support resources. Catherine's eyes lit up, like a fertility counselor, but focused on the practical and emotional aspects rather than just the psychological ones. Exactly. Someone who could spend time with new patients, explaining the process, checking in regularly during treatment cycles, and helping with insurance navigation and financial planning. The idea grew into a comprehensive patient support program that would become one of Austin Reproductive Associates' most distinguishing features. We hired Sarah Martinez, a former social worker with experience in medical settings, to serve as our first patient care coordinator. Her role was to ensure that every patient felt supported, informed, and valued throughout their fertility journey. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Patient satisfaction scores increased by 40% within the first month of Sarah's employment. Cancellation rates dropped significantly because patients felt more prepared for procedures and more confident in their treatment plans. Word-of-mouth referrals increased as women shared their positive experiences with friends and online support groups. But the real breakthrough came when I started analyzing our data more systematically. Dr. Clark's success rates were excellent, but his patient demographics were surprisingly narrow. Most of his patients were white, college-educated women in their 30s and 40s who could afford to pay out of pocket for treatments not covered by insurance. "We're missing a huge portion of the Austin fertility market," I told Dr. Clark one evening as we reviewed demographic reports. "Hispanic women make up 35% of the reproductive age population in this city, but only 8% of our patients. African American women are even more underrepresented." Dr. Clark frowned at the data. "I don't discriminate against anyone. My doors are open to all patients." "I know you don't actively discriminate," I said carefully, "but we're not actively including either. Our marketing materials are all in English. Our staff is predominantly white. Our financial counseling assumes patients have good insurance coverage or significant savings. We're unconsciously creating barriers for women who could benefit from your services." The conversation led to a comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiative that transformed our practice culture. We hired Maria Gonzalez, a bilingual nurse practitioner, who could provide culturally competent care to Hispanic patients. We partnered with community health centers in East Austin to provide education about fertility service. We developed payment plans and financial assistance programs for patients without insurance coverage. Most importantly, we began actively recruiting patients from underserved communities, rather than waiting for them to find us. The effort required significant investment in outreach and education, but the results were transformative. Within 3 months, our patient diversity had improved dramatically, and our overall patient volume had increased by 60%. The success attracted attention from other fertility specialists struggling with similar challenges. Dr. Angela Brooks from Phoenix flew to Austin to observe our operations and discuss potential consulting arrangements. Dr. Thomas Wright from Portland contacted us about implementing similar patient advocacy programs in his practice. "Amanda, I think you've created something bigger than either of us realized," Dr. Clark told me one evening as we celebrated our 4th consecutive month of record patient volume. "These other doctors aren't just interested in copying our systems, they want to be part of what we're building." The observation sparked the idea that would eventually become Harmony Fertility Network. Instead of consulting with individual practices on an ad hoc basis, we could create a formal network of affiliated clinics that shared best practices, marketing resources, and operational efficiencies. The network concept was ambitious, requiring standardized protocols, shared technology platforms, and coordinated training programs. But it also offered tremendous advantages for both doctors and patients. Smaller practices could access resources and expertise, typically available only to large corporate fertility centers, while maintaining the personalized care that made them special. I spent weeks developing the business model, creating partnership agreements, and designing the technology infrastructure that would support network operations. The work required skills I'd developed during my pharmaceutical marketing career, but applied in entirely new ways to solve different problems. Maggie visited Austin to review our progress and was amazed by what we'd accomplished in just 4 months. Patient satisfaction scores were among the highest in the country for fertility practices. Revenue had increased by 80%, while maintaining excellent success rates. Staff satisfaction had improved dramatically as new systems reduced stress and increased efficiency. "Amanda, this is extraordinary work," she said as we toured the expanded facility that now occupied the entire converted house, plus an adjacent building. "You've created a replicable model for fertility practice excellence that could transform the entire industry." But the real validation came from patients themselves. Women who'd struggled with fertility for years wrote heartfelt letters about how our patient advocacy program had made their journey bearable. Couples who'd felt overwhelmed by the medical complexity of reproductive treatments praised our educational resources and emotional support services. One letter particularly moved me, from a woman named Jennifer Thompson, who'd been trying to conceive for 3 years before coming to our practice. She wrote about feeling hopeless and invisible at her previous clinic, where she was just another number in a high-volume operation. At Austin Reproductive Associates, she felt heard, supported, and actively involved in her treatment planning. "For the first time in this process, I felt like someone truly understood what I was going through," she wrote. "The medical care was excellent, but more importantly, I felt like a whole person rather than just a set of symptoms to be treated." The letter reminded me why this work mattered beyond business metrics and revenue growth. Every system we improved, every barrier we removed, Every support service we added had the potential to transform someone's fertility journey from an ordeal into a healing experience. By month 5, the Harmony Fertility Network had grown to include 4 practices across 3 states. Dr. Brooks in Phoenix had implemented our patient advocacy model with remarkable success. Dr. Wright in Portland had achieved dramatic improvements in patient satisfaction using our communication protocols. A new partner, Dr. Lisa Rodriguez in San Antonio, had joined the network specifically because of our reputation for inclusive, culturally competent care. Each practice maintained its unique character and local market focus, while benefiting from shared resources and best practices. We'd created something that was simultaneously standardized and personalized, efficient and compassionate. The success felt surreal compared to where I'd been just 6 months earlier. In January, I'd been a publicly humiliated divorce case hiding in my Cherry Creek house. By June, I was building a multi-state network of fertility practices that was attracting attention from medical journals and industry publications. But the most significant change was internal. The woman who'd been Derek's supportive wife, carefully managing her ambitions to avoid threatening his ego, had been replaced by someone who thought bigger, acted bolder, and refused to accept limitations imposed by others. I'd discovered that my pharmaceutical marketing background, combined with my personal fertility experience, created a unique perspective that was tremendously valuable in reproductive medicine. I understood both the business and emotional sides of fertility treatment in ways that most consultants never could. More importantly, I'd learned that building something meaningful was infinitely more satisfying than maintaining something comfortable. The long hours, constant problem-solving, and relentless focus on improvement energized me in ways my previous job never had. Catherine noticed the transformation first. "You're completely different than when you arrived," she observed one afternoon, as we reviewed quarterly performance reports. "More confident, more decisive. Like you finally figured out what you're supposed to be doing with your life." She wasn't wrong. For the first time since college, I felt like I was operating at full capacity, using all my skills and talents toward a purpose that mattered. The work was challenging, but it was my challenge, built according to my vision and values. The financial rewards were substantial too. My partnership with Dr. Clark had evolved into a formal equity arrangement, with my ownership stake in Austin Reproductive Associates increasing based on practice growth and profitability. The Harmony Fertility Network generated additional consulting revenue that exceeded my previous medtech salary. But beyond money, I'd gained something infinitely more valuable. I'd proven to myself that Amanda Richardson was capable of building something extraordinary from nothing, of turning personal pain into professional purpose, of creating value that truly mattered to people's lives. As summer arrived in Austin, bringing with it the kind of heat that made Denver's altitude seem like a distant memory, I realized I'd stopped thinking about Derek entirely. The man who'd once been the center of my universe had been relegated to an increasingly irrelevant footnote in my life story. I'd heard through Maggie that Dr. Victoria Hayes had given birth to a son in May, and that she and Derek were planning a wedding for later in the year. The news produced nothing more than mild curiosity about whether they'd invite the colleagues who'd witnessed our anniversary party disaster. My transformation was almost complete, but I sensed that the real test was still ahead. Derek's betrayal had motivated my initial escape from Denver, but building something lasting required more than running away from the past. It required actively choosing a future that belonged entirely to me. The Harmony Fertility Network was that future, and by mid-summer it was clear that we'd outgrown our humble Austin origins. The demand for our services was expanding faster than we could accommodate, with fertility specialists from across the country inquiring about network membership. It was time to think even bigger, to build something that could truly transform fertility care on a national scale. The groundwork was laid, the systems were proven, and the team was ready for the next level of growth. The only question was whether I was ready to bet everything on a vision that 6 months earlier would have seemed impossible to imagine. The call came on a sweltering Thursday morning in July while I was reviewing acquisition proposals for the Harmony Fertility Network's expansion into California. Catherine knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before, something between excitement and concern. "Amanda, you need to take this call," she said, holding out the phone with her hand covering the mouthpiece. "It's someone from Peak Reproductive Medicine in Denver. They want to discuss a business partnership." My blood went cold. Peak Reproductive Medicine was Dr. Victoria Hayes's clinic, the place where Derek and I had spent countless hours pursuing the family that had ultimately destroyed our marriage. The irony of them calling me now, when I'd built something that directly competed with their services, was almost overwhelming. "Did they say specifically what kind of partnership?" I asked, buying time to process this unexpected development. The woman said her name was Jessica Collins, that she's the new practice administrator. She mentioned something about Peak needing operational consulting and hearing about our success with multi-clinic management. I took the phone with steady hands, though my heart was racing. "This is Amanda Richardson. Ms. Richardson, thank you for taking my call. I'm Jessica Collins, the newly hired administrator for Peak Reproductive Medicine here in Denver. I'll be direct with you because I know our clinic has a personal history with you, but we're facing some significant operational challenges that require exactly the kind of expertise you've developed with the Harmony Network." Her directness was refreshing, though I remained cautious. "What kind of challenges are you referring to, Ms. Collins?" "Patient satisfaction scores have dropped 30% over the past 6 months. We've had increasing complaints about wait times, communication problems, and lack of emotional support. Additionally, Dr. Hayes is struggling to manage the business side of the practice while maintaining her medical responsibilities. We need someone who understands both fertility medicine and practice management at the level you've demonstrated in Austin." The situation she described was grimly familiar. It was exactly what Dr. Clark had been facing before our partnership. The same problems that plagued most fertility practices, run by doctors who excelled at medicine but struggled with business operations. "Ms. Collins, I appreciate your confidence in our work, but surely you understand the personal complications involved here. Dr. Hayes is married to my ex-husband. This isn't exactly a standard business relationship. I'm aware of the personal history," Jessica said carefully. "That's actually why I'm calling you directly rather than going through intermediaries. Dr. Hayes and I both believe that business decisions should be based on professional qualifications rather than personal relationships. You've built something remarkable with the Harmony Network, and frankly, we need that level of expertise more than we need to avoid awkward conversations." I was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what she was offering. Peak Reproductive Medicine was one of Denver's most established fertility clinics, with resources and patient volume that dwarfed our Austin operation. If I could transform their practice using our proven methods, it would establish the Harmony Network as a truly national player in fertility care consulting. It would also put me in direct professional contact with the woman who'd destroyed my marriage, the woman who was now raising the child Derek and I had been unable to create together. The psychological complexity of that arrangement was staggering. "What specifically are you proposing?" I asked finally. "A 6-month consulting engagement to assess operations and implement systematic improvements, full access to our financial records, patient satisfaction data, and staff feedback. Compensation would be structured similarly to your Austin partnership, with performance bonuses based on measurable improvements in patient satisfaction and practice efficiency." The offer was substantial, both financially and professionally. Success with Peak Reproductive Medicine would validate the Harmony Network model at a completely different scale and establish our reputation with the kind of high-profile practice that could attract additional major clients. "I'd need to discuss this with my partners and review your current operations before making any commitments," I said, "but I'm willing to consider the possibility if everyone involved can maintain appropriate professional boundaries." "Of course. Would you be available to visit Denver next week for an initial assessment? Dr. Hayes would like to meet with you personally to discuss the scope of work and address any concerns about working together." The thought of sitting across a conference table from Victoria Hayes, pregnant with Derek's child, discussing business partnerships was almost surreal, but it was also the ultimate test of how completely I'd transformed from the woman Derek had abandoned at the anniversary party. "I'll have my assistant coordinate scheduling," I said. "Please send over any preliminary information about your current operations, patient demographics, and specific areas where you're seeking improvement." After ending the call, I sat in my office for several minutes, staring out the window at Austin's downtown skyline. The woman who'd been publicly humiliated by Derek and Victoria Hayes was being invited to consult on their fertility practice, to potentially become a business partner with the couple who'd destroyed her marriage. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it also felt like walking into a minefield of emotional complications. Every instinct told me to decline, to avoid reopening wounds that had finally healed, to protect the new life I'd built from contamination by my painful past. But another part of me, the part that had learned to see challenges as opportunities rather than threats, recognized this as the ultimate validation of my transformation. If I could successfully work with Victoria Hayes, if I could improve her practice while maintaining my professional composure, it would prove beyond any doubt that Amanda Richardson had evolved far beyond the abandoned wife Derek thought he'd left behind. I called Maggie that afternoon to discuss the situation. Her reaction was immediate and characteristically direct. "This is either the best opportunity you'll ever have, or the most dangerous mistake you could make," she said without preamble. "There's no middle ground here. If you succeed, you'll have conquered your past completely while building something extraordinary. If it goes badly, it could destroy everything you've worked to create." "What's your gut instinct?" I asked, valuing her perspective above anyone else. "My gut says you're ready for this," Maggie replied after a moment's consideration. 6 months ago I would have advised against it completely. You were too raw, too angry, too focused on Derek and what he'd done to you. But the woman I've watched build the Harmony Network isn't defined by her past anymore. She's defined by what she's creating for the future. Her words resonated deeply. The truth was that I rarely thought about Derek anymore, and when I did, it was with detached curiosity, rather than anger or pain. My identity had shifted so completely that his betrayal felt like something that had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. "There's also the practical consideration," Maggie continued. "Peak reproductive medicine is exactly the kind of high-profile client that could accelerate the Harmony Network's national expansion by years. If you can transform their practice successfully, every major fertility clinic in the country will want to work with you." She was right about the strategic value. Success with Peak would establish our credibility at the highest levels of reproductive medicine and provide case study material that could attract dozens of additional clients. The business opportunity was too significant to ignore based on personal history. I spent the weekend researching Peak Reproductive Medicine's current status, reading patient reviews, analyzing their marketing materials, and comparing their stated services with what we offered through the Harmony Network. The picture that emerged was troubling but not surprising. Despite Dr. Hayes' excellent medical credentials and impressive success rates, patient satisfaction had declined significantly since Derek's involvement with the practice. Reviews complained about impersonal care, communication problems, and the feeling that patients were being processed through a system rather than treated as individuals. The issues were entirely consistent with what happened when medical practices focused on clinical outcomes while ignoring patient experience. Dr. Hayes was undoubtedly skilled at reproductive endocrinology, but she clearly lacked the business training and emotional intelligence necessary to create a truly exceptional patient experience. Monday morning, I called Jessica Collins to confirm my visit to Denver for later that week. She arranged for me to spend a full day observing operations, reviewing financial records, and meeting with key staff members. The appointment with Dr. Hayes was scheduled for late afternoon, after I'd had time to assess the practice comprehensively. Flying back to Denver felt strange after 8 months of Austin living. The mountains looked exactly the same, but I felt like a completely different person returning to a place that no longer felt like home. I'd arranged to stay at a downtown hotel rather than with friends, wanting to maintain emotional distance from my previous life while focusing entirely on the business opportunity. Peak Reproductive Medicine occupied an entire floor of a modern medical building in the tech center, a stark contrast to Dr. Clark's converted house in Austin. Everything was sleek, expensive, and designed to project an image of cutting-edge medical sophistication, but it also felt cold and institutional, lacking the warmth and personal touch that made our Austin practice special. Jessica Collins met me in the reception area, a woman in her early 40s with the kind of crisp professionalism that suggested extensive experience in medical practice management. She walked me through the facility, introducing me to staff members and explaining their current operational structure. The problems were immediately apparent. The waiting room was designed more for visual impact than patient comfort, with hard surfaces and limited seating that created an atmosphere of clinical efficiency rather than caring support. Staff members seemed stressed and overworked, moving through their responsibilities with mechanical precision, but little genuine engagement with patients. The electronic medical records system was state-of-the-art, but poorly integrated with patient communication tools, creating information silos that led to duplicated efforts and missed follow-up. The scheduling system maximized appointment volumes, but ignored patient flow dynamics, resulting in consistently long wait times and backed-up procedures. Most concerning was the absence of any patient advocacy or emotional support services. Women undergoing fertility treatments were left to navigate complex medical and financial decisions with minimal guidance beyond clinical information. The contrast with our Austin model was stark and frankly depressing. How long have these operational issues been developing? I asked Jessica as we reviewed patient satisfaction surveys in her office. They've been building gradually over the past 2 years, but they accelerated significantly after Dr. Hayes got married, she said carefully. Her husband has strong opinions about practice management, and some of his suggestions have created additional complications. I didn't need her to elaborate. Derek's involvement in Victoria's practice was clearly causing the same kind of controlling interference that had frustrated me during our marriage. His conviction that he understood business better than the people actually running businesses was creating exactly the problems we'd learned to avoid at Austin Reproductive Associates. The financial records told a similar story. Revenue had plateaued despite increasing demand for fertility services in the Denver market. Patient retention rates were declining as women sought care elsewhere after negative experience. Staff turnover had increased significantly, particularly among nurses and administrative personnel who dealt most directly with patient concerns. Dr. Hayes is aware of these problems. She's aware that something isn't working, but she's been too busy with clinical responsibilities and personal changes to focus on systematic solutions, Jessica explained diplomatically. That's why she finally agreed to hire an administrator and seek external consulting help. By late afternoon, I'd developed a comprehensive understanding of Peak's operational challenges and identified numerous opportunities for improvement. The problems were significant, but entirely solvable using methods we'd proven successful in Austin and other Harmony Network practices. The question remained whether Dr. Victoria Hayes would be receptive to fundamental changes in how her practice operated, especially changes recommended by the woman whose husband she'd stolen and whose marriage she'd destroyed. At 4 o'clock, Jessica escorted me to Dr. Hayes's private office for our scheduled meeting. I'd prepared myself mentally for this encounter, but seeing Victoria Hayes in person for the first time since the anniversary party still felt like a physical shock. She was noticeably pregnant now, probably 6 months along, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her maternity clothes clearly expensive, but she looked tired, older than her 36 years, with the kind of stress lines around her eyes that suggested the past year hadn't been as blissful as Derek had imagined. "Amanda, thank you for coming," she said, rising from behind her desk to shake my hand with professional courtesy. "I know this situation is unusual, but I appreciate your willingness to consider working with us." Her directness was disarming. I'd expected awkwardness, defensiveness, or at least some acknowledgement of the personal history between us. Instead, she approached our meeting with the same clinical detachment she probably used with difficult medical cases. "Your practice has some significant operational challenges," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "But they're not uncommon in fertility medicine, and they're entirely correctable with the right systems and training." Jessica mentioned that you've had remarkable success improving patient satisfaction in your Austin practice, Victoria said, leaning back in her chair. "Our scores have been declining for months, and I'm concerned about the impact on our reputation and patient outcomes." We spent the next hour discussing specific problems I'd identified and potential solutions based on Harmony Network methodology. Victoria was clearly intelligent and genuinely concerned about patient care, but she was also overwhelmed by the complexity of running a medical practice while maintaining her clinical responsibility. "The truth is, I became a doctor because I wanted to help people build families," she said finally, "but I'm spending more time on administrative problems than patient care, and I'm not good at either anymore." Derek has tried to help with business decisions, but honestly, he doesn't understand the fertility industry any better than I understand practice management. The admission was revealing. Derek's involvement in Victoria's practice was clearly creating more problems than solutions, just as his controlling tendencies had limited my own career development during our marriage. "If we decided to work together, what would that relationship look like?" Victoria asked. "I need to be honest with you, Amanda. I know what Derek and I did to your marriage was wrong. I know the anniversary party announcement was cruel and unnecessary, but I can't change what happened, and I can't let personal history prevent me from getting the help my patients deserve." Her acknowledgement of the past was more than Derek had ever offered, and it created an opening for the kind of professional relationship that could benefit both of our businesses. "If we work together, it would be strictly professional," I said clearly. "I would assess your operations, develop improvement recommendations, and help implement systematic changes based on proven methodologies. My personal history with Derek is irrelevant to whether your patients receive excellent care." Victoria nodded slowly. "What would you need from me to make this work?" "Complete authority over operational changes, access to all financial and patient satisfaction data, and the ability to hire additional staff members as needed. Most importantly, I'd need Derek to have no involvement in business decisions during our consulting engagement. The last requirement was non-negotiable." Derek's interference had already created many of Peak's current problems, and his presence would make objective assessment and improvement impossible. "That shouldn't be a problem," Victoria said, though I detected some hesitation in her response. "Derek has his own practice to manage, and he's agreed to step back from involvement in my business operations." We spent another 30 minutes discussing timelines, compensation structures, and success metrics. By the end of the meeting, we'd outlined a preliminary agreement for a 6-month consulting engagement that would begin in September, giving me time to wrap up current projects with other Harmony Network clients. As I prepared to leave, Victoria stopped me with an unexpected question. "Amanda, can I ask you something personal? How did you do it? How did you build something so successful after everything that happened?" The question caught me off guard, both because of its intimacy and because it suggested Victoria understood the magnitude of what I'd accomplished since Derek's betrayal. "I stopped trying to be the person Derek wanted me to be, and started becoming the person I was meant to be," I said honestly. "It turned out those were very different people." Victoria was quiet for a moment, her hand resting unconsciously on her pregnant belly. "I hope someday I can find that kind of clarity about my own life." Flying back to Austin that evening, I reflected on the day's developments. The meeting with Victoria had been less emotionally charged than I'd expected. More like a consultation with any other potential client than a confrontation with the woman who'd helped destroy my marriage. But it had also revealed something important about Derek's new life. His marriage to Victoria was clearly experiencing some of the same controlling dynamics that had frustrated me for years. His interference in her practice was creating problems rather than solutions. And Victoria was beginning to recognize that Derek's business instincts weren't as reliable as he believed. The irony was delicious. Derek had left me for a woman he thought would be more grateful for his guidance and support. Instead, he'd found someone whose independent success made his controlling tendencies even more problematic than they'd been in our marriage. Over the following weeks, I finalized preparations for the Peak Reproductive Medicine engagement, while continuing to expand the Harmony Network's reach into new markets. We'd added 2 more practices in California and were in negotiations with fertility specialists in Florida and North Carolina. The network was becoming exactly what I'd envisioned: a comprehensive support system that helped independent fertility practices achieve operational excellence, while maintaining their unique character and local market focus. Each successful transformation validated our methodology and attracted additional clients seeking similar improvements. But the Peak engagement would be different from any previous project. Success would establish the Harmony Network as the premier fertility practice consulting organization in the country. Failure could damage our reputation and potentially derail the expansion we'd worked so hard to achieve. More personally, working with Victoria Hayes would be the ultimate test of my transformation from Derek's abandoned wife to a confident business leader who could succeed in any environment. If I could improve the practice of the woman who'd stolen my husband while maintaining my professional composure, it would prove that Amanda Richardson had truly evolved beyond the limitations of her past. September arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Denver beautiful, though I barely noticed the scenery as I drove to Peak Reproductive Medicine for my first official day as their operational consultant. The woman walking into that building was fundamentally different from the one Derek had abandoned 15 months earlier. I carried with me not just proven methodologies and successful case studies, but the unshakable confidence that came from building something meaningful from nothing. The Harmony Network was my creation, my vision made real through hard work and strategic thinking. Derek thought he'd destroyed me when he drove away from that anniversary party, leaving me humiliated and supposedly helpless. Instead, he'd freed me to become someone more successful, more fulfilled, and more powerful than the woman he'd married. The real confrontation was still ahead, but I was no longer the person who needed to fear it. I was the person who would define its terms. 3 months into my consulting engagement at Peak Reproductive Medicine, the transformation was already remarkable. Patient satisfaction scores had climbed 45%. Wait times had been reduced by an average of 30 minutes per appointment, and staff morale had improved dramatically as we implemented the patient advocacy model that had proven so successful in Austin. Victoria Hayes had been an ideal client, receptive to recommendations and willing to invest in the operational improvements necessary for lasting change. She'd hired 2 additional staff members, upgraded their communication systems, and personally participated in customer service training that helped her develop better bedside manner with anxious patients. The success felt professionally satisfying, but it was also personally vindicating in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Every positive patient review, every efficiency improvement, every staff member who commented on how much better the workplace had become was proof that Amanda Richardson could succeed anywhere, even in the most emotionally complicated circumstances imaginable. Derek, as promised, had stayed out of the day-to-day operations during my engagement. I occasionally saw him in the parking lot or caught glimpses of him visiting Victoria's office, but we'd maintained complete professional distance. He looked older, more stressed than I remembered, but I felt nothing more than distant curiosity about the man who'd once been the center of my universe. That changed on a cold December morning when Jessica Collins knocked on my temporary office door with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Amanda, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "There's been a development that could affect everything we've built here." I looked up from the financial projections I'd been reviewing, immediately alert to the urgency in her voice. "What kind of development?" "Derek has been pressuring Victoria to sell the practice to Denver Fertility Group," Jessica said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "He's convinced her that joining a corporate network would provide better financial security and reduce her administrative responsibility." The news hit me like a physical blow. Denver Fertility Group was a national chain of corporate fertility centers, known for high-volume, low-touch patient care. They were everything the Harmony Network stood against: efficient, profitable, and completely impersonal. If Victoria sold to them, all the improvements we'd implemented would be dismantled within months. "What's Victoria's position on this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "She's conflicted," Jessica admitted. "The offer is substantial, and Derek has been very persuasive about the benefits of corporate ownership. He's scheduled a meeting for this afternoon with their acquisition team to discuss terms." I stared out the window at Denver's downtown skyline, processing the implications of what Jessica had told me. Derek's interference in Victoria's business decisions was about to undo months of careful work and destroy the patient-centered practice we'd built together. But there was something else. Something that made this feel personal rather than merely professional. Derek was repeating the same pattern that had frustrated me throughout our marriage, inserting himself into decisions he didn't understand, imposing his will on situations where his expertise was irrelevant, controlling outcomes to satisfy his own ego rather than achieving the best result. "Jessica, I need you to arrange a meeting with Victoria immediately," I said, reaching for my phone. and I need to make some calls to Austin. Over the next 2 hours, I assembled a counter-proposal that would fundamentally change the trajectory of peak reproductive medicine, while demonstrating Derek's complete misunderstanding of what his wife had built. Instead of selling to a corporate chain, Victoria could become the flagship practice of the Harmony Fertility Network's expansion into Colorado. The proposal was ambitious but strategically brilliant. Victoria would maintain ownership of her practice while benefiting from the operational support, marketing resources, and shared expertise of our growing network. She'd gain the administrative relief Derek thought corporate ownership would provide, but without sacrificing the personalized patient care that made her practice special. More importantly, the financial terms were significantly better than what Denver Fertility Group was offering. My analysis of their typical acquisition deals revealed that they consistently undervalued independent practices, then extracted maximum profit through cost-cutting measures that degraded patient experience. When I finished preparing the presentation, I realized I'd created something more than a business proposal. I'd designed the perfect trap for Derek's arrogance and controlling nature, a scenario where his interference would be exposed as not just unhelpful but actively harmful to Victoria's interest. The meeting was scheduled for 4 o'clock in Victoria's office, with Derek and the Denver Fertility Group representatives attending to present their acquisition offer. I'd arranged to present the Harmony Network alternative immediately afterward, giving Victoria the opportunity to compare both options directly. At 3:45, I positioned myself in the conference room adjacent to Victoria's office, reviewing my presentation materials one final time. Through the glass partition, I could see Derek arriving with 2 men in expensive suits, who could only be the corporate acquisition team. Derek looked exactly as I remembered him: tall, confident, impeccably dressed, and radiating the kind of self-assured authority that had once impressed me but now seemed hollow and performative. He moved through Victoria's office like he owned it, directing conversations and managing interactions with the casual assumption that his opinions were automatically the most important in the room. Victoria, by contrast, looked tired and overwhelmed. Her pregnancy was now advanced enough to make movement awkward, and the stress of managing a growing practice while navigating Derek's business advice was clearly taking its toll. She listened to the Denver Fertility Group presentation with polite attention, but I could see her discomfort with their emphasis on efficiency metrics over patient satisfaction. The corporate representatives were exactly what I'd expected: smooth, professional, and completely focused on financial returns rather than medical outcomes. They spoke about optimizing patient throughput and streamlining operational redundancies in ways that made fertility treatment sound like manufacturing widgets rather than helping people build families. Derek nodded approvingly throughout their presentation, occasionally interjecting with questions that demonstrated his complete misunderstanding of reproductive medicine. He seemed particularly impressed by their promises of reduced administrative burden, apparently not realizing that those reductions would come at the expense of the personalized care that made Victoria's practice successful. When the Denver Fertility Group finished their presentation, Victoria thanked them politely and asked for time to consider their offer. Derek immediately began advocating for acceptance, listing all the reasons why corporate ownership would solve their current challenge. The administrative support alone would be worth the transition, he said confidently. You'd be free to focus entirely on patient care while they handle all the business complexities you've been struggling with. That's when Jessica knocked on the door and announced that I had an alternative proposal to present. The expression on Derek's face when he saw me walk into the room was worth every moment of preparation I'd invested in this presentation. "Derek," I said with professional courtesy, extending my hand for a handshake he couldn't refuse without appearing rude. "It's good to see you again." His grip was firm but his eyes were wary, clearly wondering what game I was playing. "Amanda, I didn't realize you were still working with Victoria's practice. Amanda has been instrumental in improving our operations over the past 3 months," Victoria said, her voice carrying a warmth that suggested genuine appreciation for my work. "Our patient satisfaction scores have improved dramatically since she began consulting with us." Derek's jaw tightened slightly at this news, though he covered his reaction quickly. "That's wonderful." Though of course the corporate model Derek Fertility Group is proposing would provide much more comprehensive support than any individual consultant could offer. I smiled and opened my presentation materials. "Actually, Derek, That's exactly what I'm here to discuss. I believe Victoria has an opportunity that would provide all the benefits of corporate support while maintaining the independence and patient focus that make her practice special. Over the next 30 minutes, I walked through the Harmony Network proposal with the same precision and passion I'd used to build our success in Austin. I showed Victoria how joining our network would provide administrative support, marketing resources, and operational expertise while allowing her to maintain ownership and control of her practice. The financial comparison was devastating to Derek's preferred option. The Harmony Network offered better terms, higher profit potential, and significantly more autonomy than the corporate acquisition. More importantly, our model was designed to enhance rather than replace the patient-centered approach that made Victoria successful. The fundamental difference, I explained, making eye contact with Derek as I spoke, is that the Harmony Network believes exceptional patient care and strong financial performance go hand in hand. Corporate chains see them as competing priorities where patient care must be sacrificed for profit margins. Derek tried to interrupt several times, but Victoria held up her hand for silence, clearly engrossed in understanding the proposal. She asked detailed questions about network governance, resource sharing, and implementation timelines that demonstrated both her intelligence and her genuine interest in the opportunity. When I finished the presentation, the room was quiet for several moments. Derek looked like he'd been hit by a truck, clearly recognizing that his wife was considering an option that would make his business advice irrelevant. "This is very impressive, Amanda," Victoria said finally, "but I need to understand something. Why are you offering this to me? Our personal history makes this seem, well, complicated." The question I'd been waiting for, the moment that would define not just this business arrangement, but the entire trajectory of my relationship with the past Derek represent. "Victoria, 18 months ago, your husband destroyed my marriage in the most public and humiliating way possible," I said calmly. "He assumed that would destroy me as well, that I'd retreat into victimhood and irrelevance while you two built your perfect new life together." Derek's face had gone pale, and I could see him recognizing the trap he'd walked into by attending this meeting. "Instead, his betrayal freed me to build something extraordinary," I continued. "The Harmony Fertility Network exists because Derek's cruelty forced me to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed. Now I'm offering you the chance to benefit from what I've learned, to build something better than what either corporate ownership or Derek's business advice could provide." I turned to face Derek directly for the first time since entering the room. "Derek, you taught me that depending on someone else for my security and self-worth was a mistake I'd never make again. You showed me that the only person I can truly count on is myself. Thank you for that lesson." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek stared at me with a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear, finally beginning to understand that the woman he'd abandoned had become someone more successful and powerful than he'd ever imagined possible. "The truth is," I said, returning my attention to Victoria, "I'm not offering this partnership in spite of our personal history. I'm offering it because of what that history taught me about building something that lasts, something that can't be taken away by other people's choices or failure." Victoria was staring at me with undisguised admiration, clearly recognizing the strength it had taken to transform personal devastation into professional triumph. "And if I accept this partnership, what guarantee do I have that personal feelings won't interfere with business decisions?" "You have the guarantee of results," I said simply. "The Harmony Network's success speaks for itself. We've transformed 12 practices across 6 states, consistently improving both patient satisfaction and financial performance. Our methods work because they're based on what actually helps people, not on ego or control, or the need to prove anyone right or wrong." Derek finally found his voice, though it sounded strained and defensive. "Victoria, you need to think carefully about this. Amanda clearly has an agenda here that goes beyond business consulting. This could be some kind of revenge plot designed to hurt our family." The accusation was so absurd, so revealing of Derek's own mindset, that I almost laughed. "Derek, my revenge was building something better than the life you took away from me. My revenge was proving that you did me a favor by setting me free. I don't need to hurt your family because I don't care enough about your family to waste energy on hurting." Victoria looked between us with growing understanding, finally seeing clearly the dynamic she'd become part of when she married Derek. "Derek, I think you should leave now. This is a business decision about my practice, and I need to make it based on what's best for my patients and my professional future. Derek's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Victoria, you can't seriously be considering that. She's manipulating you, using our personal situation to Derek. Leave. Now. Victoria's voice carried an authority I'd never heard from her before, the voice of a woman who'd finally recognized her own power and was prepared to use. Derek looked around the room one last time, his gaze lingering on me with undisguised hatred, but beneath the anger I could see something else, the dawning realization that he'd lost control of a situation he'd assumed he could manage. This isn't over, he said quietly as he gathered his things. Yes, it is, I replied with calm certainty. It's been over since the moment you drove away from our anniversary party. You just didn't realize it until now. After Derek left, Victoria and I spent another hour discussing the practical details of joining the Harmony Network. The conversation was businesslike and productive, focused on implementation timelines, staffing requirements, and integration with our existing client practices, but there were moments when the personal significance of what we were doing became apparent. Victoria was choosing to align herself professionally with the woman Derek had betrayed, effectively repudiating his business judgment and decision-making authority. It was a declaration of independence that went far beyond practice management. Amanda, can I ask you something? Victoria said as we wrapped up the meeting. Do you think Derek and I will be able to work through this? The way he acted today, the way he's been pressuring me about business decisions I should be making myself. The question was loaded with implications about her marriage, her relationship with Derek, and her growing recognition that the man she'd married might not be the partner she'd thought she was getting. Victoria, I learned the hard way that you can't change someone who doesn't want to be changed, I said carefully. Derek believes he knows what's best for everyone around him, and he gets angry when people don't appreciate his guide. Whether you can build a marriage around that dynamic is something only you can decide. She nodded slowly, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. I'm beginning to understand why your marriage didn't survive. Derek doesn't really want a partner, does he? He wants an audience for his decisions and someone to implement his plans. The insight was painfully accurate, a recognition that had taken me years of marriage to fully understand. The good news is that you're figuring this out much earlier than I did, and you have options I didn't have when I was in your position. 3 weeks later, Victoria officially signed the partnership agreement that made Peak Reproductive Medicine the flagship Colorado practice of the Harmony Fertility Network. The announcement generated significant interest from medical journals and industry publications, establishing our network as a serious competitor to corporate fertility chains. Derek's reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. According to Jessica, he'd spent the days following Victoria's decision in a state of barely controlled rage, alternating between attempts to convince her she'd made a mistake and threats to leave if she didn't reconsider. Victoria's response was to suggest that perhaps some time apart would help them both gain clarity about their relationship. Derek was currently staying at a hotel while they pursued couples counseling, though Jessica doubted the marriage would survive. Derek's inability to accept that his wife had made a business decision without his approval. The irony was perfect. Derek had destroyed our marriage by leaving me for a woman he thought would be more compliant and grateful. Instead, he'd found someone whose independent success made her even less tolerant of his controlling behavior than I'd. But the real satisfaction came from what I'd built rather than what Derek had lost. The Harmony Fertility Network was now operating in 8 states with over 20 affiliated practices. We were revolutionizing fertility care by proving that exceptional patient experience and strong financial performance could coexist and reinforce each other. The work was meaningful in ways that went far beyond personal vindication. Every couple who felt supported and informed during their fertility journey, every woman who felt heard and valued during treatment, every family that formed with our help was a testament to what became possible when business practices were aligned with human value. 6 months after the confrontation in Victoria's office, I received an unexpected phone call. Derek's number appeared on my phone display, the first direct contact we'd had since that December afternoon. Amanda, we need to talk, he said without preamble when I answered. I thought we'd covered everything pretty thoroughly during your last visit to Peak Reproductive Medicine. Victoria filed for divorce, he said, his voice hollow with defeat. She's keeping the practice, keeping the house, and I'm losing everything I worked to build with her. I was quiet for a moment, processing the news and my complete lack of surprise at this development. I'm sorry to hear that, Derek. Divorce is never easy, regardless of the circumstances. You did this, he said suddenly, anger flaring in his voice. You manipulated her, turned her against me, destroyed my marriage just like I destroyed yours. The accusation was so far from reality that I almost pitied him. Derek's inability to accept responsibility for his own choices, his need to blame others for the consequences of his behavior, was the same character flaw that had ruined our marriage, and was now destroying his relationship with Victoria. Derek, I didn't destroy your marriage, I said calmly. Your marriage destroyed itself when you tried to control a successful, independent woman the same way you tried to control me. Victoria didn't leave you because of anything I did. She left you because of who you are. She would never have had the courage to leave if you hadn't shown her it was possible, he insisted. If you hadn't filled her head with ideas about independence and building her own success. You're right about one thing, I said, feeling a deep sense of closure settling over me. I did show Victoria that it was possible to build something meaningful after leaving a controlling marriage. I showed her that by building the Harmony Network, by proving that success comes from lifting others up rather than holding them down. Derek was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its anger, replaced by something that sounded almost like desperation. Amanda, I made a mistake. Leaving you the way I handled everything, it was all wrong. I can see that now. Is there any chance we could work things out, start over, build something together based on what we've both learned? The request was so unexpected, so completely disconnected from reality, that I wondered if Derek had lost touch with sanity entirely. The man who'd publicly humiliated me, who'd spent the past 2 years building a life with another woman, was now suggesting we reconcile. Derek, even if I were interested in rebuilding a relationship with you, which I'm not, what exactly would you bring to that partnership? What would you contribute that I don't already have? The question seemed to stump him, probably because he'd never seriously considered what value he might offer to someone who'd already built a successful, fulfilling life without him. I could help you expand the network, he said finally. My medical connections, my understanding of the healthcare industry, my business experience. I couldn't help laughing at the suggestion. Derek, the Harmony Network is already expanding faster than we can accommodate new clients. We have more medical connections than we need, and our understanding of healthcare business practices is proven by results. As for your business experience, well, I think Victoria's decision about peak reproductive medicine speaks to how valuable the medical community finds your advice. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but Derek's position became increasingly untenable as he realized I wasn't the desperate dependent woman he'd left behind. I was a successful business owner who'd built something extraordinary from the wreckage of our marriage, someone who no longer needed anything he could provide. When I finally ended the call, I felt a profound sense of completion. Derek's attempts to blame me for his latest relationship failure, his pathetic suggestion that we reconcile, his complete inability to understand how thoroughly I'd moved beyond him, all of it confirmed that leaving our marriage behind had been the best decision I'd ever made. The woman Derek had abandoned at that anniversary party truly was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more capable, and infinitely more fulfilled. Amanda Richardson had not just survived Derek's betrayal, she'd used it as fuel to build something he could never touch, never control, never take away. The Harmony Fertility Network continued to grow and prosper, helping thousands of couples navigate their fertility journeys with the kind of comprehensive support and personalized care that made the difference between ordeal and healing. Victoria's practice became one of our most successful affiliates, a testament to what became possible when medical expertise was combined with business excellence and genuine compassion. As for Derek, I heard through the medical community grapevine that he'd eventually left Denver, relocating to a smaller city where his reputation wasn't quite so tarnished by his personal and professional failures. I felt no satisfaction in his struggles, but no sympathy either. He was simply irrelevant to the life I'd built, a footnote in a story that had become much larger and more meaningful than our failed marriage. Standing in my Austin office one sunny afternoon, Looking out at the city that had given me a second chance at life, I realized that Derek's cruelest betrayal had been his greatest gift. By forcing me to discover what I was truly capable of achieving, he'd set me free to become the person I was always meant to be. The woman who'd been publicly humiliated 18 months earlier had transformed into someone who was changing an entire industry, someone whose success story inspired other women to believe they could rebuild their lives after devastating betrayal. That transformation was worth more than any marriage that required me to diminish myself to accommodate someone else's ego. Derek thought he'd destroyed me when he chose Victoria Hayes over the life we'd built together. Instead, he'd accidentally given me everything I needed to build something better than either of us had ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.